The crisp October morning in Chicago drew a larger-than-expected crowd to the Riverside estate sale. Sophia Martinez, an antique dealer with years of experience, moved through the mansion with practiced efficiency, expertly sifting through the decades of accumulated belongings. Her trained eye quickly spotted valuable items among the clutter as she navigated the sprawling Tudor-style mansion. The Williamson family had called this house home for almost a century. Now, after the death of the last heir, elderly Margaret Williamson, who had no children, strangers were rummaging through their personal things. Each item had a price tag, reducing a lifetime of memories to mere dollars and cents. In the mansion's wood-paneled library, Sophia found a collection of framed photographs on an antique mahogany desk. Most were typical family portraits spanning decades, graduation pictures, wedding photos, holiday gatherings. However, one photograph caught her eye. It had an ornate silver border, tarnished with age. The photo, judging by the clothing and style, was from the 1920s. It showed a young couple posed in what appeared to be their living room. The man wore a three-piece suit with a pocket watch chain, his hair slicked back in the style of the time. The woman, in a drop-waist dress typical of the flapper era, sat gracefully beside him, a soft smile on her face. Between them, cradled in the woman's arms, was a baby no older than 6 months. The baby wore a long christening gown of delicate white lace, the kind wealthy families ordered for special occasions. At first glance, the portrait looked like a snapshot of the prosperity and happiness of the Roaring Twenties, a successful couple with their beloved child in their comfortable home. The lighting was professional, suggesting a formal portrait session, not a casual family photo. But as Sophia looked more closely, the baby's expression gave her pause. While the parents smiled warmly at the camera, radiating contentment and pride, the infant's eyes held something different. Even at that young age, there was an unmistakable intensity in that tiny face. It wasn't the blank, innocent stare of a baby, but something that seemed almost aware, almost fearful. Sophia bought the photograph for $25, unable to shake the feeling that those small eyes were trying to tell her something important. Back at her antique shop in Lincoln Park, Sophia carefully took the photograph out of its frame to examine it more closely. She knew from years of experience that the most valuable information about old photographs was often hidden on the back, photographers' stamps, dates, names, or notes that provided crucial context. The back of the photograph revealed what she'd hoped to find, an embossed stamp that read, Henryk Kowalski Photography Studio, Chicago, Illinois, and a date in elegant script, October 15, 1920. Below that, in different handwriting, were 3 names, Robert, Catherine, and baby Thomas Williamson. Sophia's pulse quickened. She recognized the Kowalski name. Henryk Kowalski had been one of Chicago's most prestigious portrait photographers in the 1920s, known for capturing the wealthy elite of the city. His work was highly sought after by collectors. More importantly, Kowalski was known for his meticulous record-keeping. If his studio archives still existed, they might hold valuable information about this particular session. She spent the next 2 hours searching online databases and historical records. What she discovered made the photograph even more intriguing. Robert Williamson had been a successful banker in 1920, part of Chicago's financial elite. Catherine Williamson, née Hartford, came from old money. Her family had made a fortune in railroad investments in the late 1800s. However, the information about baby Thomas stopped Sophia in her tracks. According to an obituary from the Chicago Tribune archives, Thomas Williamson had died in November 1920, only a month after the photograph was taken. The cause of death was listed as sudden infant death syndrome, although medical understanding of SIDS was primitive at best in 1920. Sophia stared at the photograph again, focusing on the baby's eyes. Now that she knew Thomas would be dead within weeks of the portrait, his expression seemed even more haunting. Was it possible that, in some mysterious way that sometimes happened with old photographs, the camera had captured something the human eye couldn't see? She reached for her phone to call Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a photography historian at Northwestern University who specialized in early 20th century portraiture. If anyone could help her understand the technical aspects of what she was seeing, it would be Dr. Chun. "I have a 1920 Kowalski portrait that's unusual," Sophia explained. The baby's expression doesn't match the parents' mood at all. It's almost as if the child is seeing something the adults can't. "Bring it in tomorrow morning," Dr. Chin replied, her voice immediately interested. Kowalski was known for capturing things other photographers missed. His portraits often revealed more than his subjects intended to show. Dr. Elizabeth Chen's office at Northwestern University looked like a museum of photographic history. Vintage cameras from different eras lined the shelves, and the walls displayed significant portrait photography spanning nearly 2 centuries. When Sophia arrived the following morning, Dr. Chin was already preparing her examination equipment. "Henryk Kowalski," Dr. Chin mused as she carefully placed the photograph under her specialized lighting. He was an interesting figure in Chicago's photography scene. He immigrated from Poland in 1910 and built a reputation for portraits that seemed to capture people's inner essence, not just their appearance. Dr. Chun studied every detail of the image through her magnifying equipment. The technical quality is exceptional, even by Kowalski's standards. Look at the depth of field, the way he captured the texture of the mother's dress, the intricate details of the baby's christening gown. Sophia watched as Dr. Chin focused intently on the baby's face. "What's unusual about the infant's expression?" "Several things. First, babies this young, probably 4 to 6 months old, typically have very limited facial expressions. They might smile reflexively, cry, or sleep. But this child appears to be focusing on something specific outside the camera's range." Dr. Chin adjusted her equipment for a clearer view. "Look at the direction of his gaze. He's not looking at his parents, not at the photographer, but towards something to the left of the camera setup. Could it be a sound that caught his attention? Possibly, but notice his facial expression. This isn't curiosity or a startle response. If I had to describe it, I'd say it looks like weariness, even fear." Dr. Chin continued her examination, paying close attention to the lighting and shadows in the photograph. "There's something else interesting here. Kowalski was famous for his use of natural light. But in this portrait, there are multiple light sources. See these shadow patterns? They suggest there was strong lighting coming from the same direction the baby is looking toward. What kind of lighting? Hard to say definitively, but it's not consistent with the soft, natural light Kowalski typically preferred. It's almost as if something bright, perhaps reflected light or an additional lamp, was positioned in that area during the shoot." Dr. Chin leaned back in her chair, removing her glasses, a gesture Sophia was beginning to recognize as significant. "Sophia, in my experience, when babies this young show such a specific, focused expression, they're usually reacting to something immediate in their environment. The question is, what was in that room that we can't see in the photograph?" "The baby died a month later," Sophia revealed quietly. "Sudden infant death syndrome, according to the records." Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "That changes things. In 1920, SIDS wasn't well understood, and many infant deaths that might have had other causes were attributed to it. Combined with this child's expression." She paused, studying the photograph again. "I think we need to research this family more thoroughly." Sophia spent the following days immersed in research at the Chicago History Museum. The Williamson family records painted a picture of typical wealthy Chicagoans of the 1920s: charity events, business dealings, mentions in the society pages. As she dug deeper into newspaper archives and public records, a more complex story began to unfold. Robert Williamson, she discovered, had been more than just a banker. He had been involved in several controversial financial deals in 1919 and 1920, including investments later investigated for fraud. While he was never formally charged, his name appeared in connection with schemes that had cost several families their life savings. Even more troubling were the personal details she uncovered. Catherine Williamson had been hospitalized twice in 1920 for what the medical records euphemistically called nervous exhaustion, a common diagnosis for women suffering from what would now be recognized as severe depression or anxiety. However, it was a small item in the Chicago Tribune's society section from November 1920 that made Sophia's blood run cold. Following the tragic loss of their infant son Thomas, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Williamson have announced their intention to travel abroad indefinitely. Mrs. Williamson's physician has recommended a change of climate for her health. Sophia found more clues in the Cook County property records. The Williamsons had sold their house on North Lakeshore Drive in December 1920, just 2 months after the portrait was taken and 1 month after baby Thomas's death. The sale was handled quickly and quietly, with the house selling for significantly less than its assessed value. At the Chicago Public Library's genealogy section, Sophia discovered something even more disturbing. Thomas Williamson had not been the couple's first child to die young. Catherine had given birth to a daughter, Mary, in 1918. According to the death certificate, Mary had died at 8 months old, also attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. 2 babies, both dead before their first birthdays, both deaths attributed to the same mysterious cause that doctors in 1920 barely understood. Sophia stared at the photograph again, focusing on baby Thomas's worried expression. Had this child somehow sensed that he was in danger? Her research led her to one more crucial discovery. The Williamsons' house on North Lakeshore Drive was still standing. It had been converted into luxury condominiums in the 1980s, but the building's original structure remained largely intact. The current owner of what had been the Williamsons' unit was Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatrician who had bought the condo specifically because of its historical significance. Sophia called Dr. Foster, explaining her research into the photograph and the Williamson family's tragic history. "I'd love to see where this portrait was taken," Sophia said. "Sometimes seeing the actual space can provide clues about what was happening when a photograph was made." "Of course," Dr. Foster replied. "Though I should warn you, there are some unusual things about this apartment that might interest you, given what you're investigating." Dr. Amanda Foster's condominium occupied the entire 3rd floor of the elegant limestone building on North Lakeshore Drive. As she led Sophia through the renovated space, it was easy to imagine how it had looked in 1920. Spacious rooms with high ceilings, large windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of home that proclaimed its owner's success and social standing. "The living room where your photograph was likely taken is through here," Dr. Foster said, guiding Sophia into a beautifully appointed room with original hardwood floors and restored crown molding. "I've tried to maintain the historical character while updating it for modern living." Sophia pulled out the photograph, comparing it to the current space. Despite the modern furniture and updated lighting, she could recognize the room's basic structure, the placement of windows, the architectural details, even the general positioning where the Williamsons would have posed for their portrait. "When I bought this place 15 years ago, I researched its history," Dr. Foster continued. "The Williamson story was part of what drew me to it. Actually, as a pediatrician, I was intrigued by the mystery of their children's deaths." "Mystery?" Dr. Foster gestured for Sophia to sit down, her expression growing serious. "I've seen thousands of cases of infant mortality in my career, and while SIDS does occur, 2 cases in the same family within 2 years are extremely unusual. Modern medicine would have investigated much more thoroughly." She walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a folder. "After I moved in, I found some things the previous owners had left behind: documents, photographs, even some personal items that had been stored in the basement for decades." Sophia's heart raced as Dr. Foster opened the folder. Inside were several items that clearly dated to the Williamson era: household bills, personal correspondence, and, most remarkably, a letter from Catherine Williamson to her sister, dated November 20th, 1920, just 5 days after baby Thomas's death. "May I?" Sophia asked, reaching for the letter. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone under extreme emotional distress. "Dearest Margaret, I cannot bear to stay in this house another day. Thomas is gone, just like Mary, and I know in my heart that Robert— I cannot write the words, but you know what I suspect. The doctor says it was the same condition that took Mary, but I have seen how Robert looks at the children when he thinks no one is watching. There is something cold in his eyes, something that frightens me. I found the bottle of laudanum hidden in his study, far more than any person would need for occasional pain. And the night Thomas died, Robert had been alone with him for over an hour before calling for help. When I touched my baby's skin, it was so cold, Margaret. So very cold." Sophia's hands trembled as she finished reading. She looked up at Dr. Foster, who nodded grimly. "There's more," Dr. Foster said quietly. I think you should see the room that was the nursery. Dr. Foster led Sophia down a hallway to what had been converted into her home office. This was the nursery in 1920. When I renovated, I discovered something behind the original wallpaper that the previous owners had never removed. She pointed to a section of wall where the historical wallpaper had been carefully preserved under glass. Look closely at the pattern. Sophia examined the delicate floral wallpaper, typical of the period. As she studied it more carefully, she noticed something unusual. In several places, the pattern was interrupted by small, dark stains that looked almost like fingerprints. Those are tiny fingerprints pressed into the wallpaper at about the height where a crib would have been placed, Dr. Foster confirmed. And they're not alone. She led Sophia to another section of the preserved wallpaper where the stains were different, larger, more irregular. These tested positive for laudanum when I had them analyzed out of curiosity. Sophia stared at the evidence, her mind reeling. You think Robert Williamson was drugging his children? I think Robert Williamson was systematically poisoning his children with laudanum, and Catherine suspected it but couldn't prove it. Laudanum was readily available in 1920, often used for everything from headaches to insomnia. A banker like Robert would have had easy access to it, and the symptoms of laudanum poisoning in infants could easily be mistaken for SIDS. Dr. Foster walked to her desk and retrieved another document. I also found this, a partial diary entry that Catherine apparently hid behind a loose floorboard. The diary entry, written in Catherine's increasingly desperate handwriting, painted a horrifying picture. October 10th, 1920. Thomas has been so listless lately, sleeping far more than a healthy baby should. When I mentioned this to Robert, he became angry, saying I was being an overprotective mother, just as I had been with Mary. But I watch him when he thinks I'm not looking. I've seen him give Thomas what he claims is medicine, but the baby always becomes drowsy afterward. I found the small brown bottle in Robert's study again, the same type that was there when Mary was sick. He says it's for his back pain, but I've never seen him take any. And there are marks on the bottles. Tiny scratches that look like someone has been measuring doses. Tonight, I'm going to watch more carefully. I'm going to protect Thomas, even if it means... The entry ended abruptly, the handwriting trailing off as if Catherine had been interrupted. Sophia looked back at the photograph, now understanding why baby Thomas's eyes held such weariness. He was looking at his father during the portrait session. That would be my assessment, Dr. Foster agreed. Babies that young are incredibly sensitive to danger. If Robert Williamson had been systematically poisoning Thomas, the child would have learned to associate his father's presence with feeling sick, with pain. That expression in the photograph isn't random. It's a baby's instinctive recognition of a threat. Armed with this new understanding, Sophia returned to her research with renewed urgency. She needed to find Henryk Kowalski's studio records, hoping they might contain additional details about the portrait session that could confirm their suspicions. After several phone calls and emails, she discovered that Kowalski's archives had been donated to the Chicago Photography Archives at Columbia College after his death in 1965. The archivist, Dr. Marcus Webb, agreed to meet with Sophia to examine any records related to the Williamson portrait. Kowalski was incredibly detailed in his record-keeping, Dr. Webb explained as they descended into the climate-controlled basement where the archives were stored. He documented not just the technical aspects of each shoot, but often included personal observations about his subjects. They located the 1920 ledger, and Dr. Webb carefully turned to the October entries. There, in Kowalski's precise handwriting, was the entry for October 15, 1920. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Williamson, with infant son Thomas. Commission formal family portrait for holiday cards. Payment $50 in advance. Technical notes. Natural lighting from east windows supplemented with reflector. Mrs. Williamson very nervous throughout session, frequently checking on baby. Mr. Williamson impatient, wanted to complete session quickly. Personal observations. Unusual family dynamic. Baby appeared distressed whenever father approached. Mrs. W, very protective, would not allow husband to hold child during poses. Infant healthy appearing but seemed unusually alert, shocked, wary for age. Recommended they reschedule when baby more settled, but Mr. W insisted on proceeding. Final note. During final exposures, baby became agitated when father moved closer for group pose. Expression captured shows infant's clear distress. Mrs. W requested I not include certain poses in final selection. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Even the photographer had noticed the strange family dynamics and baby Thomas's fear of his father. However, there was more. Dr. Webb found a folder of correspondence related to the Williamson session. Inside was a letter from Catherine Williamson to Kowalski dated November 25, 1920, 10 days after Thomas's death. Dear Mr. Kowalski, I am writing to request all photographs and negatives from our October session. My husband has asked me to retrieve them due to our son's recent passing. However, I must ask you a personal favor. If you observed anything unusual during our session, anything that concerned you about my family's welfare, please document it and keep those records safe. I fear there may come a time when such observations become important. I am enclosing payment for an additional set of prints to be held in your personal files. Please do not mention this to my husband. Sincerely, Mrs. Catherine Williamson. P.S. My baby's eyes in that final photograph. You captured something important. Please preserve it. Sophia realized that what she had uncovered was potentially evidence of century-old murders. Despite the passage of time, she felt a moral obligation to document her findings properly. She contacted Detective Maria Santos of the Chicago Police Department's Cold Case Unit, explaining that she had discovered evidence related to suspicious infant deaths from 1920. Detective Santos, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, was intrigued enough to meet with Sophia at the antique shop. As Sophia laid out all the evidence, the photograph, Catherine's letters, Dr. Foster's discoveries, and Kowalski's records, Detective Santos listened with growing interest. Obviously, we can't prosecute a case from 1920, Detective Santos said. But from an investigative standpoint, this is fascinating. The pattern you've identified is consistent with what we now know about family annihilators, people who systematically kill family members, often for financial reasons. She studied the photograph carefully. Infanticide cases from that era were rarely investigated thoroughly, especially when the perpetrator was a wealthy, respected member of the community, and laudanum poisoning would have been almost impossible to detect with 1920s medical knowledge. Detective Santos pulled out her laptop and began searching modern databases. Let me see what I can find about Robert Williamson's later life. After several minutes of searching, she found records that made the case even more compelling. Robert Williamson remarried in 1925 to a wealthy widow named Helen Morrison. She had 2 young children from her previous marriage, a son and a daughter. Sophia's heart sank, sensing what was coming next. Both children died within 2 years of the marriage, the son in 1926, age 6, attributed to pneumonia, and the daughter in 1927, age 4, from what was called wasting sickness. Helen Morrison Williamson died in 1928, apparently from grief and declining health. He did it again, Sophia whispered. It certainly appears that way. By 1930, Robert Williamson had inherited substantial wealth from his second wife and had moved to California, where he lived comfortably until his death in 1954. Never remarried, no more children. Detective Santos closed her laptop. What you've uncovered here is evidence of a serial killer who used his social position and the medical limitations of his era to murder multiple family members, probably for financial gain. Robert Williamson eliminated his own children and stepchildren and likely contributed to his wives' deaths through psychological abuse. She looked at the photograph again, focusing on baby Thomas's fearful expression. This child knew he was in danger. Somehow, that camera captured his recognition of a threat that the adults around him either couldn't see or chose to ignore. As word of Sophia's discovery spread through academic and historical circles, she received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Patricia Williamson, a retired psychiatrist living in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Williamson explained that she was the great-great-niece of Catherine Williamson and had been researching her family's history for years. I've been trying to understand what happened to Catherine after she left Chicago in 1920, Dr. Williamson said. Your research may have finally provided the answers I've been looking for. They arranged to meet when Dr. Williamson flew to Chicago the following week. She brought with her a collection of family documents passed down through Catherine's sister's family, items Catherine had sent to her sister Margaret over the years. The most significant discovery was Catherine's complete diary, which she had mailed to Margaret in pieces between 1920 and 1925. The complete diary told a harrowing story of a woman who had slowly realized her husband was a murderer but had been trapped by the social and legal constraints of her era. The entry for October 15, 1920, the day of the portrait session, was particularly revealing. "Today, we had our photograph taken. I insisted that Thomas be included, though Robert was reluctant. He said the baby would spoil the formal nature of the portrait, but I wanted a record of our family while Thomas is still with us. I have such fears about his health lately." During the session, I watched Robert's face when he looked at Thomas, the same expression I remember from when Mary was sick, a kind of cold calculation, as if he were studying a problem to be solved rather than looking at his own child. The photographer, Mr. Kowalski, was very kind and patient. He seemed to notice that Thomas became upset whenever Robert came nearby. When I asked him to pose with Thomas and me a few times, Robert got angry, but Mr. Kowalski backed me up. "I'm praying Thomas will get stronger, but I'm afraid Robert sees our kids as getting in the way of something he wants more." I found papers in his study about life insurance policies, and there are financial papers I don't get. Sometimes I see him looking at me with that same cold look he gives the kids. The diary kept going in the weeks after Thomas died, and Catherine wrote more and more about how sure she was that Robert had murdered their son. November 20th, 1920. Tonight, I confronted Robert about the laudanum. He got really mad and said I was having another one of my nervous breakdowns, but I showed him the bottle I found, the one with the sweet, gross smell. He said it was old medicine from when the doctor was treating my headaches, but I know he's lying. I can't stay in this house. I can't pretend to be sad with the man who killed my babies. Tomorrow, I'm taking whatever money I can get to and going to Margaret's. Robert can have his money and his good name. I just want to get away from him before he decides I'm also in his way. 6 months after Sophia first found it, the Williamson case had become something people studied in school and were fascinated by. The portrait that had looked so harmless at first was now known as one of the most important pieces of evidence from a crime in the early 20th century. Dr. Chin put together a symposium at Northwestern University called Photography as Historical Evidence, the case of the 1920 Williamson portrait. Scholars from all over the country came to look at how modern ways of investigating could show the truths hidden in old photographs. Sophia stood in front of a crowd of historians, criminologists, and photography experts. The blown-up portrait was right behind her, where everyone could see it. Baby Thomas's scared eyes seemed to be watching over everything, finally getting the attention and understanding he didn't get when he was alive. This photograph shows us that the truth has a way of keeping itself safe, even when powerful people try to hide it, Sophia said to finish her presentation. Baby Thomas Williamson couldn't talk, couldn't say what happened, couldn't protect himself, but his eyes told a story that stayed around for more than 100 years, waiting for someone to see what they were saying. In the crowd, Dr. Patricia Williamson wiped away tears. After the presentation, she went up to Sophia with one last piece of Catherine's story. "Catherine lived until 1965, she said quietly. She never got married again, never had any more kids. She spent her life working with groups that helped abused women and children, but she never talked about what happened to her. She kept that photograph of Thomas until the day she died, along with all the evidence she had against Robert." "Why didn't she ever go to the police?" Sophia asked. "She tried a few times. It was a woman's word against a banker who everyone respected, especially since she was saying he killed his own kids. She knew no one would believe her, but she wrote everything down, hoping that someday someone would understand." Dr. Patricia Williamson gave Sophia one last envelope, Catherine's last letter, written right before she died. She asked that it only be opened if someone ever found out the truth about her children. With shaky hands, Sophia opened the envelope and read Catherine's last words. "To whoever finds this truth, My babies were murdered by their father, Robert Williamson, and I couldn't do anything to save them. I've kept this secret for 45 years, hoping that someday justice would be served. If you're reading this, then Thomas's eyes finally told their truth. Please remember that he was loved, that he was innocent, and that his short life mattered. Please remember that sometimes evil looks respectable, but the truth has a way of surviving even the strongest lies. Thank you for seeing what I saw in that photograph. Thank you for listening to my baby's silent story. May this knowledge help protect other children from suffering like mine did. As the symposium ended and people started to leave, Sophia stayed in her seat, looking up at the blown-up portrait. Baby Thomas's eyes, which weren't a mystery anymore, had finally told their story. The photograph that had once shown a happy family now stood as proof of the power of truth and how important it is to believe people who can't speak for themselves. The portrait ended up in a Chicago History Museum for good, shown with the whole story of the Williamson family tragedy. People who visited often talked about the baby's strange look, and now they could finally understand what those young eyes had been trying to say all along.